Hey my quilty friends, in today's video I'm going to show you how to make the Folded Corners Quilt Block. Now this block is part of my Mystery Block of the Month series, and if you don't know what that is, I'll put a link down below. It's actually our last block and we're going out with a bang. We're going to do half square triangles and flying geese in this block. But don't worry, we've done these techniques before and you can do it. Let me show you how. So here's our Folded Corners Quilt Block. Now for the C fabric, traditionally you'd also use the same fabric that we've used for D. So D would be here as well, or C there. If you know what I mean, they'd both be the same. But I did want to use that extra fabric, so I did decide to do my C fabric in a different fabric. That's entirely up to you. Now we need to cut all these fabrics here on the legend, and I've listed them all out. For example, for the A fabric, we need to cut one piece at 7 1/4 inches by 7 1/4 inches, and so on. Now you can either take a screenshot of this right now, or you can click the link down below in my description, which will take you over to my website to get a copy of this. Now we need to make half square triangles, and we also need to make flying geese. Let's do the half square triangles first. So we'll start with our A and our F fabric that measures 7 1/4 inches by 7 1/4 inches. So now I'm going to face them right sides together. So if this had a right side, it would be facing me, and the right side of this fabric is facing down. And we want to line up all the edges on all 4 sides and then pop a pin in to keep it in place. Now what we're going to do is just sew around all 4 edges. We're stitching at stitch length 2, and I've got my 1/4 inch foot on to get my 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to start at the very edge and then stitch all the way down to the very end. Just going to stitch right off the edge, lift my foot up and turn it around, and then line it up so I can sew along the next side. And then I'll repeat that until I've sewn along all 4 sides. Cutting the thread, removing the pins, and if you'd like to, you can press before we cut. Now what we're going to do is cut on the diagonal from corner to corner on both sides. So I'm going to take my ruler, I'm going to line it up on the top corner. Where those stitches intersect, I want my ruler to be going right down the middle of that, at the top and at the bottom. So once I've adjusted it for both, I'll just double check, and that looks good, and then we'll cut. Then I'm not going to move anything, I'm just going to carefully turn it around, and if you don't have a rotating mat, just turn your mat around. And then I'll do exactly the same on this side. Now let's press our 4 pieces. So setting the stitches, and like the name suggests, it's setting the stitches into the fabric, making them stronger and help the block lay flatter. Then we're going to press towards the dark side, so lifting it over, finger pressing and pressing. And repeating that for all 4 blocks. Well, all 4 pieces. So now we need to square up our pieces so that they measure 4 1/2 inches squared, and I do happen to have a ruler that is exactly 4 1/2 inches squared. So what I do is I place the diagonal line on my ruler right on top of that seam there. I make sure it's fitting within the block. For example, it's not sitting like that, because then we'd be missing these 2 sides. And then I would just trim all 4 sides, rotating. This mat is really handy, but something I've just invested in, so it's not a must-have, but it's definitely a nice-to-have. Okay, now if you don't have a perfect 4 1/2 inch ruler, you just take a ruler that you have, and then you place the diagonal line on your seam just like we did before. But now we just have to work out 4 1/2 inches. So I can see my 4 1/2 inches is there, and once again I'm just making sure it fits in, and it does. So I'll just trim this side first. Then I'll turn it around and I'll do the same on this side. Popping that diagonal line on my seam, finding my 4.5 inch mark on my ruler, and that mark should be lining up perfectly where I just cut it. And then I'll just trim this side. And then I'll repeat that for the other two sides. So you can see it's a little bit more work, but you can do it, it's fine. Okay, and then I'll finish squaring up my remaining 2 blocks. I've got my remaining F piece here and my 4 D pieces. What I'm going to do is place my F piece with the right side facing me, and then I'm going to take a D piece and face that right sides down so it's right sides facing each other. And I'm going to line up the 2 edges. Oh, it's a little bit fiddly. Then I'll take another piece and pop that on the top, and if you've got directional fabric, just check you're happy with how it's sitting. I can see mine are both going that way. So again, I'm making sure it's lined up on the edges, and then when I'm happy, I'm going to draw a line from the top corner down to the bottom corner, just being careful not to accidentally move anything. So double checking I'm right on that corner there, coming right down here. With the pencil, you're not going to see it, so just use whatever you've got on hand. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is just pin them in place, making sure those edges stay nicely lined up. So now I'm just going to start right on the very edge and sew down both sides with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Coming right off the edge and cutting my thread, turning around and going down the other side. Coming right off the edge, cutting my thread, removing my pins, and if you'd like to, you can give it a quick press before we cut. So now we're going to cut down the line that we drew earlier, so I'm just going to take my ruler and place it right next to that line so I can cut down the actual line, and when I'm happy I'll cut. And now we're going to press. So now we're going to set the stitches, and then we're going to push these pieces up. Now one piece is on top, so we'll do that one first. So we're pushing it over, finger pressing so there's no creases in here, and then pressing. And then we'll do the same for this piece. And then I'll take my second piece and do exactly the same. Now with the 2 remaining D fabrics, we're just going to turn them over, and on the wrong side, draw a line from corner to corner again. So I'm just lining it up at that very top corner and at the bottom, and then when I'm happy, drawing my line. And I'll do that on both pieces. Okay, and then I'll take one of my pieces and I'm going to face it so the larger piece is coming down into a triangle facing me. It's kind of creating a heart shape. And I'm going to place this right sides down so they're facing, so the fabric's right sides together, and I'm lining up these edges, and then I'm just going to pop a pin in just to keep it in place. And then I'll do exactly the same for the second piece. And now we're just going to sew down both sides of our drawn line with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, just like we did previously. So starting on the very edge again, sewing down both sides of the line, and then I'll do this for both pieces. Okay, removing the pins, and if you'd like to, you can press again at this step, and then we're going to cut. Now we're just going to cut along that line we drew on both pieces. Okay, let's press. So for all 4 pieces, setting the stitches and then pressing towards the darker fabric. So now we need to square them up so they measure 2.5 inches wide and 4.5 inches long. Now if you have a special flying geese ruler, use that because it will be much easier. I don't have one right now, it's still packed away in boxes, so I'm just going to use a regular ruler. What I do have though is this really handy diagonal line that's going both ways, and if I pop those lines on my seam, you can see that fits in there perfectly. Where it comes to the point, it sits exactly there, and then I have a 1/4 inch away from the seam, and that's where I will trim. If you don't have that on your ruler, because I'm not sure what ruler you've got, we're just measuring from this point a 1/4 inch away, and then we'll trim that excess off. So what you do is you just find one diagonal line, because all rulers do have one diagonal line. You'd line that up, and you'd line a 1/4 inch mark right on that point and trim this excess off. Then we'll turn it around, and we need it to measure 2.5 inches. So all we're going to do is find the 2.5 inch mark on our ruler and place that edge we just cut right on the 2.5 inch mark, and trim the excess on this side, and there's not a lot. There we go, and now we need to cut it on this side. So what I'm going to do is make sure that that point is right in the middle. If it needs to be 4.5 inches wide, then that point should be right at 2.25 inches. So I'm just going to find 2.25 inches on my ruler. Put it right on that point there. I'm also going to make sure that that edge there of my fabric is lined up on my ruler on both sides, so I know it's nice and straight. Then I'm just going to cut this excess off. And then I'll turn it around and do exactly the same on this side. If you had a 4.5 inch wide ruler, at this point you could just measure 4.5 inches. But I'm just going to measure 2.25 inches again, making sure those 2 lines are also on the edge of my fabric, and trimming. And I'll repeat that for all 4 pieces, so they measure 4.5 inches wide and 2.5 inches. So 4.5 inches long, 2.5 inches wide. Now we're going to sew the B piece to our flying geese. Now I've put my flying geese all in a pile facing in the same direction. I'm guessing this piece here is the geese. So I've got the larger piece to the right here, and then the point is coming down towards the B piece. And with my B fabrics, I've just made sure they're all facing the same way. If you're using directional fabric, just make sure you're happy with how it's facing. Then I'm going to take a piece from each pile, face them right sides together, and we want to sew along this edge. So I'm just going to line up those edges nicely and pin it while I'm here. And a little trick when you're sewing these together, as we're going to sew along here, is when you do get to the point, make sure you're sewing on the other side of the V here, because if you sew on this side of the V, you will lose that point. So just make sure you're on the other side of that V. So then I'll take the next set and pin them and sew on until I've pinned all 4 sets. And I'm just making sure all those edges are lined up nicely. Okay, let's sew them together. Sewing right at the beginning, removing my pins as I need to, making sure those seams are being sewn down in the direction they're pressed, making sure I'm not losing that point. Coming off the very edge and then taking my second piece. Cutting our threads and then just snipping the thread that's holding them together, the chains. Just being careful not to cut our fabric, and then let's press. So setting the stitches and pressing towards the B fabric on all 4 pieces. So now we've got all our pieces ready, and I've got my image here, and I'm just going to lay them out so they match my image. I'm going to start with the C piece in the center, and if it's directional, make sure you're happy with the direction it's sitting. And then I'm going to place my pieces with the flying geese with my B piece coming in towards the center or the C piece. And so on. Okay, so now what we're going to do is just simply sew our columns together like we always do, and then we'll sew them together. So you know what I like to do at this stage is just fold these over right sides together, roughly pop a pin in so I know which seam to sew together, so I don't end up in a right royal pickle. Okay, let's finish off this block. So now we're just going to line up those seams nicely. Now on some of the blocks we're joining 2 diagonal joins together, but they can't be nested. So what I'm going to do is make sure the edges are all lined up nicely, open it up and make sure when I'm opening it up it's creating a nice straight line, the best that I can. Okay, and then I'll pop a pin right through that to keep it in place. And then down at the bottom. I'll find the next join, and that's exactly the same. We've got exactly the same thing happening. And I do find that it's better to start off your sewing on this end rather than the end that's just 2 pieces of fabric. And then I'll just sew those carefully. I'm going to put the pressure down on my foot and then remove that pin because it's right on the edge there. And then I'm actually just going to check it. Now I'm really happy with how that's just turned out. It looks like a really nice point. But don't forget, if you're not happy, you could just unpick and try again, and you know, just get it to a point where you're happy with it. So it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. If you can live with it, move on. If you can't live with it, then just unpick it and try again. So now we're just going to press our seams so we can sew our columns together, and remember, we want to nest them, so we'll press 1 set of seams down, 1 up and 1 down. So you guys all know the ropes now. Okay, let's sew those columns together. All we're going to do now is fold them on right sides together, and then we'll nest those seams. So I'll find one set of seams. We've got one set folded over going that way, one folded over going this way. We'll butt them up against each other, make sure these edges are all lined up nicely. Open it up to check we're happy it's creating a nice straight line there. And then popping a pin in. Finding the next set of seams. Doing the same. And then I do like to pop in a pin at the beginning, in the middle and the end. Don't forget we're going to come up to that little situation where we've got the two pieces on the diagonal there, so just lining them up the best you can, popping a pin right in through them, and we'll have the same at the bottom. Okay, then I'll sew that together and then I'll attach the last column and then we're done. Okay, now don't forget you can check that you're happy with how that's been sewn together, and then let's press. So setting the stitches, and then we'll press the seams out towards the outer edge, finger pressing and then pressing. Oh, just making sure it is sitting nicely under there. Okay. There we go, and then I'll just give the whole thing a press, the whole block a press rather. And there we have our really cute folded corners quilt block. So there we have our folded corners quilt block. Now I know it is a little bit harder than any of the other blocks that we've done in this series, but I know you can do it because we've done these techniques in other quilt blocks. Just take your time, there's no rush. And thank you so much for joining me for my mystery block of the month for 2023. Please do make sure you're signed up for my email so you can find out what I'm offering next year. And if you'd like to know what block we made last month, we made the single Irish chain quilt block. I'll put the link above for you to check that out. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.